Okay, welcome to today's webinar on right-sizing third-party monitoring, or TPM. I know people are still filtering in, so I'll do this introduction again in a minute. But for the 35 people who have joined so far, today's webinar is part of Social Impact's Evidence for Impact webinar series. And I'll copy and paste the link to learn more about this webinar series in the chat. You can go to this link and you can see the recordings of the last 12 webinars that we've done. And that's a good reminder that today's webinar will be recorded and will be made publicly available. If we could ask those participants who are coming in and joining us right now to engage in a poll. If you all could scan the QR code on the slide in front of you, or use the Mentimeter link that was pasted into the chat above. I'm sure we can repaste it here. And just really quickly answer a one-question poll about your experience with third-party monitoring. It would help us today tailor the webinar to you and for our panel to tailor their own presentations. So as we wait a little bit longer, if people could just either scan the QR code or click the link and complete the one question poll. Thanks very much. For those newcomers on the Zoom webinar, we are completing a one-question poll, either by scanning the QR code or clicking on the menti.com link to the right, just to help everyone know people's past experiences with TPM or third-party monitoring. Thank you. Okay, great. We now have over 50 participants joining our webinar, so let's begin. Welcome to today's webinar on right-sizing third-party monitoring, or TPM. Yvonne, if you can move to the next slide. So today's webinar is part of Social Impact's Evidence for Impact webinar series, which spotlights innovations and evidence of to improve development outcomes. And today's webinar is going to focus on innovations and evidence from 3 USAID-funded activities that use third-party monitoring in Haiti, Mali, and Somalia. So our panelists today will be providing some of those innovations and examples, but we're also going to use this as an opportunity to gather evidence and learn from each other in the audience. So we will have a participatory exercise where we get to share a little bit about our own experiences with different TPM approaches and hopefully learn from each other as well as our panel. So next slide, please. So our agenda today is to very quickly make the most of our 1 hour and do some introductions. I'll explain why use third-party monitoring, and then our panel will share their experiences on the ground, as well as a continuum of TPM approaches. Then my colleague Katie will do a participatory exercise, and lastly, our panel will do a little bit of Q&A. So next slide, please. My name is Chris Thompson, and I'm a technical director with Social Impact. For the last 2 years, I've served as the czar of this webinar series. And now to our panel, over to you, Harry, to begin the introductions.
My name is Harry Francois. I work for USAID Mali as the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Advisor. I'm the COR for the Mali Mail Platform, a 5-year activity that is being implemented by Social Impact. I am a panelist for this webinar. Turn it over to Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. My name is Lucas Barake. I'm Deputy Chief of Party for the USAID Somalia Evaluation, Learning, and Monitoring Initiative. Yeah, it has been running for the last 1 year. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Mandel. I'm a program director in Social Impact Strategy, Performance, and Learning Division. And I'm currently serving as acting chief of party in Mali, which is why I'm here in Mali with Harry. So yeah, and I'm a panelist. I think we're going to keep videos off even while we present because both in Kenya and Mali, we have concerns about bandwidth issues.
That's exactly right. Thanks so much, Jen. Now, Yvonne, let's flip over and we'll let our audience take a look at the poll results and see where we are with our experience with third-party monitoring. So this is a really good spread that we have today. There's at least a quarter of us who have no experience and are here to learn, which is great. That's exactly what we've structured the webinar to do. Others have engaged in it in one country or are sort of experts across several different countries. And we have more poll results coming in right now. But I think that this is great information for our panel to tailor their presentations to, and we're so lucky to have you in the audience today. Yvonne, over to the next slide. What do we mean by third-party monitoring? Well, third-party field monitors are contracted by donors. In this case, our examples are USAID-funded donors, projects, to act as eyes and ears when donors cannot access activities themselves. So contracting third parties to verify donor-funded activities usually occurs in non-permissive environments. And there can be a lot of different uses for third-party monitoring or TPM. The principal one that comes to my mind is ensuring that aid or development assistance reaches its intended beneficiaries. But there are a lot of other uses out there, right? So one is quite clearly just to verify the implementation of activities. Another is certainly about accountability, right? TPM is there to track the progress of activities, verify implementation and outputs, and sometimes outcomes. And our panelists are going to speak to that in a minute. But if I could direct everyone to the graphic on this slide, and just point out 3 important elements. So this is a generic description of third-party monitoring, but TPM usually works as sort of a parallel system. So you have the donor and the traditional implementing partner, and then third-party monitoring goes out and verifies what's occurring, right? So it's sort of a secondary monitoring to what the implementing partner would be doing themselves. I think the second element to point out in the graphic is the arc. And that's sort of the bottom half of the graphic, which signals that much of third-party monitoring occurs in non-permissive environments where it's difficult to or impossible for the donor to get out to the sites to verify that themselves, potentially due to access or safety considerations. The last element to point out in the graphic I think, is all about the audience, right? So TPM, we often think of those field monitors as reporting to the donors, but as this graphic illustrates, another audience of that could also be the implementing partner themselves that wants to know if their activities are being implemented according to the work plan. So with that, I'll hand it over to Harry, who will talk a little bit more about why third-party monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So the first thing we will be we should discuss about third-party monitoring is why do we do routine monitoring, often called verification. So under this routine monitoring, we usually do output verification, like material delivery verification, training attendance verification, sometimes construction such as school building verification. TPM is usually found in non-permissive environments, which sometimes require more information gathering than just verification. AOR and CORs sometimes ask for beneficiary feedback. So in these cases, in these instances, we gather beneficiary viewpoints through surveys. AOR sometimes ask for information such as whether or not outcomes are happening in the field. Therefore, obtaining more information to satisfy decision-making takes more resources, time and money, and then it might under other circumstances. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. To Lucas. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Harry. That is really interesting in terms of what TPM looks at from the perspective of USAID. So I want to come in by providing a bit of more experience from what has been happening in Somalia, where ELMI has been operating for the last 1 year. Yeah, so what I'm going to share are lessons that touch on what Harry has just pointed out, especially around how TPM comes in to respond to the needs of the client, and sometimes the challenges around collecting data in non-permissive areas, the limited resources that we work with. So at the end of the day, there are so many trade-offs that you need to take care of. And for us as ELMI, one of the things I need to share here is we have to make a decision between the in-depth verifications and the routine verification. This is basically responding to the needs of the client in terms of what information are they looking for. Of course, there is the routine information to be able to know how activity implementation is progressing and whether outputs are being met. But there is also information that is needed in terms of making decisions, programmatic and administrative. So sometimes we need to go beyond the routine verification. And as ELMI, we have, for each quarter, we have at least one provision to do an in-depth verification. And this is basically responding to the needs of USAID from the different offices. So they have the option of choosing on the area to focus on so that we are responsive to their different needs. So this has proved very important because we are able to go beyond the routine information and trying to get more detailed information around outcomes. Yeah, so it sounds like a mini evaluation, like the other speakers have already mentioned. Yeah, so it is a balance. Going beyond a routine verification, it's not an evaluation, but getting more detailed information, more in-depth in terms of the outcomes. The other aspect that has been at play with ELMI is looking at quantity versus quality. Yeah, this is especially in terms of selection of sites and even questions. Yeah, so as you do our TPM, or as we do our TPM, yeah, we need to have sites that are balanced so that we are providing information to the different users, information that is tailored based on the different questions that the clients might have. And one of the things that we have done and that has proved very useful is having a question bank where we have a kind of a database of those critical questions that each of the officers within USAID or each of the activity managers want to see or want to hear from third-party monitoring. And in addition to that, there is the aspect of the selection of sites, of course, the sampling approach, where we are having both purposive and random selection of sites. And this has also helped because for the purposive sampling, it allows the activity managers at USAID to choose sites or activities that are of interest to them. Yeah, so this gives them the leverage to get information that helps them to make their day-to-day decisions. And at the same time, from our end, we use the random site selection to maintain objectivity. Yeah, so it's balancing between purposive and random selection of the sites. And for each quarter, for instance, we have up to 50 verifications that we need to do. And out of the 50, we give at least 20 to the USAID activity managers to be able to nominate what is of interest to them. And this also extends even to the implementing partners, because even to them, there are things they want to see about their activities. So they have the opportunity of nominating or selecting activities or sites they want included in the verification through the activity managers, of course. And this has really helped to meet the needs of the different users of the information and the evidence generated from TPM. The last aspect I wanted to share is the issue of combining the different services. Like for ELMI, beyond the monitoring and verification, we also do some engineering verification. We also do data quality assessment. We do performance management. So from the different services, one of the things we look at is trying to ensure that there is complementarity across different services. And that has really proved very beneficial at the end of the day in terms of triangulating the findings that come out of MV&R, and also helping to, sorry, I lost connection, but I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so for instance, when the engineering team is doing their verification from, yeah, I know, Chris, you also lost connection. Yeah, I hope we can be heard. Okay. Yeah, so that has really helped the complementarity, integration across different service areas, so that even as we do monitoring and verification, we are using that to support data quality improvement. Yeah, so ensuring that there are synergies across the different service areas, and this is really helping from our implementation. That's what I wanted to share. I want to pass it over to Jen for the next of the presentation. Over to you, Jen.
Okay, thank you so much, Harry and Lucas. I really appreciate both of your perspectives. So what I'm going to do is present this continuum, which reflects different kinds of TPM approaches, and they vary based on client needs. So they can range from very simple, straightforward things like compliance checks. USAID has standardized compliance checklists, for example, for branding and marketing, for environmental compliance and for family planning compliance. This is probably one of the easiest, most straightforward kinds of TPM to implement, because it's really just a checklist of whether things are being implemented properly or not. The next stage is output verification, which both Lucas and Harry discussed. And in this, it's really just seeing whether things got done the way that they were supposed to be done and the way that the implementing partner has said they got done. Did the training take place? So we check on that, but for example, by looking at attendance sheets, looking and taking a picture of them and marking again on a verification checklist whether that happened or not. We had a TPM here in Mali where we needed to see whether the implementing partner had done some focus groups and KIIs, which were part of their work plan. So we looked at the terms of reference for the KIIs and the focus groups. We verified the terms of reference. We verified participant sign-in lists. And then we complemented that with some interviews with those participants to find out whether or not they had indeed participated and what they'd gotten out of those exercises. So this is where we're going into the middle point on the continuum, the verification plus quick beneficiary survey. We refer to it as the survey. Sometimes it can take the form of a very short survey to get beneficiary feedback on the intervention. In the case of the example I cited a moment ago, we did instead some very short key informant interviews to find out whether people had participated and what their impressions were of the activities in which they had participated. And then the next step up gets more into outcome verification. So this is sort of looking at going beyond just simple document verification and quick surveys, complementing those with, for example, for training, a pre and post test. Did those happen? What was the outcome of those? Or asking participants how doing key informant interviews or focus groups with beneficiaries from different interventions to see whether what they got out of the interventions, how the interventions are impacting their community. So for example, in another example from Mali, we asked participants things like how the communities were continuing the activities or what the impact of the activity was on the community. For example, a BHA activity that we did a TPM of that required some outcome verification. We talked with recipients of fortified flour and asked them what the impact of that fortified flour was on their community, and they talked about things like decreases in malnutrition. So this is getting a bit more at the outcomes of the activities. And then at the most extreme end, you could end up with a lot of KIIs. For example, in that BHA example I just cited, we actually ended up doing over 100 different interviews or data collection events, including KIIs and focus groups, to really get at the outcomes. And so you can see that the data collection in that instance can really get quite high and even be higher than you might see in some evaluations. And so the important thing here is to really understand client information needs, the donor information needs, to make sure that the request corresponds to that, so that the approach that you take, the methodologies that you apply, will actually provide the information they need. And then the next step is to make sure that you have both the time and the resources to be able to get that information. So from there, let me pass it over to Katie for our participatory exercise.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Serini, and I'm a technical specialist with Social Impact Strategy, Performance, and Learning Division. We are now going to move into understanding where your experience is on this continuum. So in either using the QR code or the Menti links that are in the chat, please go to the poll and choose which, as many of these parts of the continuum as you have experience with, so we can understand a bit more about where you have experience with TPM. So we will just give about a minute to do that. Feel free to continue to post questions in the chat. We will be asking our panelists these questions during our Q&A session in a minute, and we appreciate your participation. All right, so we'll just give about 1 minute. If anyone is just joining, we are going to the Menti poll once again to add our experiences about where you have experienced TPM on this continuum. All right. And I will probably give us another maybe 30 seconds, Yvonne, if we can move over to our results and see how things are coming in. Great. All right. So continue to put your experience in here. So it looks like we have a bit more experience toward the middle. Oh, Jen, are you? All right, coming off mute. All right, so we're seeing a bit more experience toward kind of the middle to the bottom of our continuum, kind of evenly around output verification, as well as verification and quick beneficiary surveys, and a bit less toward the more complicated, the more complex part of TPM and outcome verification. So great. So I'm going to pass over quickly to our panelists to see if they have any thoughts about what has come in through our poll.
Let me go first. Thank you so much, Katie, for these results. Quite interesting indeed. I was fearing that probably it will be heavy on the compliance checks side. But what I'm seeing here is a kind of a normal curve. And I think to me, what I see is that TPM has really evolved. It is evolving, and we are having a balance of meeting, of course, those day-to-day compliance requirements, accountability needs, moving to the level where we need more complex information to help in terms of decision management and adaptive management. I think this is really a good show, a good summary of where TPM stands. Yeah, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like Lucas, I think that this reflects like what I would have expected it to reflect, because I have to say I've almost never seen compliance checks just as a standalone activity. I've most frequently seen them paired with output verification or verification with some kind of beneficiary feedback. And I think, as Harry mentioned in his part of the discussion, there's a tendency for donors to want work more in that verification plus beneficiary feedback space, because they don't have eyes and ears on the ground themselves. They're really trying to get a picture of what's going on. And so a simple output verification won't provide enough information. Although we do often see that, still see that, just output verification. But I think more often than not, in both Haiti and in Mali, what I've seen is the verification with beneficiary feedback or simple outcome verification as well.
Thank you so much, Lucas and Jen. Harry, did you have anything to add there?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you so much to our panelists for weighing in. So now we are going to move on to our kind of question and answer part of this webinar. Thank you to everyone who has been posting questions in the chat. Please continue to do that. And I hope we will be able to get to all of these. So let's start with, I want to start with a question around technology. Which I think is a bit earlier in the chat. Maybe we will move on to another one. So question from Ashley, what are some reasons why a TPM would become as large as a mini evaluation? And in that case, does it follow USAID's evaluation policy? And at that point, why wouldn't you just do an evaluation? So this question goes to our panelists to weigh in.
I would say that from USAID perspective, we don't want to encourage AOR to ask questions that to request a TPM like an evaluation, to ask like type evaluation question in a TPM request, because the evaluation policy is clear what should be count for external evaluation in the case of USAID. So we kind of discourage the type of like question that look like evaluation questions. But we understand that sometimes AOR and COR at USAID wants to get more information than simple output verification. And this is why here at USAID Mali, we see that AOR and COR try to combine output verification and beneficiary feedback. It's a quick survey, quick beneficiary survey. It's not an evaluation. Doesn't have the same scope than an evaluation does.
Can I ask Harry, maybe from what I've seen as well, it could also be a question of timing. So if there's information on outcomes needed for decision making, but it's needed maybe, sooner than the several months it might take to do an evaluation, that could potentially be a case where outcome verification is added to a CPM request if you need that information sooner, because it's a quicker process than an evaluation. I don't know if that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, let's go by the definition. So we said TPM, it's a monitoring.
Yeah.
So it's not an evaluation.
Yeah.
It will never be an evaluation.
Yeah. It's distinct.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is that, if we're doing some outcome verification, you want to triangulate perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where sometimes you could end up doing a bit more data collection than you would in a simple outcome verification or output verification.
Yeah.
Because you want to do the documentary verification as well as get the implementing partner's perspective, probably like they have a sub partner in the field, and maybe different groups of stakeholders who participated in the intervention. And so that triangulation could lead to having a number, a fairly large number of data collection events. But I think the critical difference that Harry highlighted is the nature of the questions that are being asked, that even if the amount of data collection can approach an evaluation, that the nature of the questions are fundamentally different.
Sure.
And that's really the issue.
Yeah, that's really the issue. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much to our panelists. I'm going to move on to another question. So Albana asks, what are your experiences with collecting just-in-time data from project participants directly as part of monitoring or post-activity monitoring? And what experiences do you have with participants using technology? And how have incentives been used to encourage participants to share information or feedback? So I'm going to post those in the chat again, because there are a couple of things there. So panelists, feel free to respond to any of these questions. And thanks, Albana, again, for raising these.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, Katie. And I think Lucas, you and I can probably take that and share our experience in Somalia, where one of the things we measure ourselves by is not just the number of site visits that we conduct, but how quickly we conduct them, right? Because that just-in-time nature is real, right? That really is a necessary component of both the donor and the implementing partner's decision-making needs, right? Able to get that information just in time. Now, we do digital data collection in most cases, and Lucas, I'll leave you to talk just a bit generally about our system and the different quality assurance checks that we do on the system. But then also you've been leading an interesting initiative that has through virtual and remote participation by the donor enabled them to almost verify it in real time alongside of us, right? So they become not just an audience member, but they actually participate in some of our TPM. But I'll stop stealing your thunder, and I'll turn it over to you, Lucas, if you want to talk a little bit about our system. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris, for those perspectives. You are right. Those innovations have really helped. And I think for us, the issue around live verifications, that's where we are able to send in field monitors when the activity is happening. That has proved very beneficial in terms of getting live data, timely data. And that also helps even the client, because we are able to bring in the USAID activity managers to have a direct interaction with some of the beneficiaries and ask any pertinent questions that they have. And that really helps in terms of getting information in a timely manner. And I think the other aspect that I wanted to add, Chris, is the issue of how we deploy our field monitors. Because one of the things you need is being able to quickly send the team on the ground. So having a wide pool of field monitors from the different locations, including those hard to reach areas, that makes it really easy in terms of deploying within a very short time, and also embracing technology, of course, having support remotely to the field teams, conducting trainings remotely. That helps to make the process move very fast and get the data as quickly as possible so that it is helping make the right decisions at the right time. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Lucas. I think I'll leave it there and pass it back to you, Katie. I don't know if there was an element, the questions are coming very fast into the chat right now, so I'm not sure if we fully addressed that one. I want to proceed to the next one. Mute, you're on mute.
Yes, always happens at least one time, right? All right, so let's move on to the next question. I think so one just came in from Tamara, who is a bit newer to M&E. So we really appreciate your question and engaging with TPM. So how can a TPM activity overcome or mitigate resistance from implementing partners who may not want to be monitored? I think definitely an important question and a challenge. Could our panelists respond to that?
Yeah, I'll do a quick response and then I'll pass it to our colleagues with experience in Mali and Haiti. But I think, I think that it's normal, that this resistance and skepticism we encounter a lot in monitoring and evaluation and learning, whether conducting an evaluation on an implementing partner or providing third-party monitoring. So this is a really good point, Tamara, and it's something that I think we encounter more than in just third-party monitoring. But we have found that the first step to overcoming that skepticism actually happens way before the site visit, way before the results are delivered, and comes in the generation of the tool that we use for our third-party monitoring, right? The questionnaire, which we develop closely with the donor and with the implementing partner, and use a lot of the implementing partner's own documentation to make sure that that tool is useful to the implementing partner as well, right? And sort of the first step in overcoming that skepticism is making sure that they know that what we are doing as third-party monitors will be useful to them. Over to others for a more global perspective.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to share some experience that we have in Mali, how we overcome or mitigate this type of resistance from the implementing partners. I think the first thing to note that is we need to be transparent. We need to share with the implementing partners, what are the objectives of those site visits or those TPMs? Because sometimes they see the TPM contractor as a type of policeman that goes to the field and report to USAID, and this is not the goal of the TPM. The goal of the TPM is to make sure that USAID knows about what is happening on the field. And this information, when reported to USAID, would be both benefit to USAID and to the implementing partners. So to overcome this obstacle, we need to look for, we try to look for good collaboration between the TPM contractor and the IP. And by doing this, sharing information is the most important thing. For example, in Mali, we share the TPM request that the COR wants, the TPM request for the site visit. We share the TPM report with the implementing partners. So this is how we try to overcome this type of resistance from the implementing partners. Jennifer, I don't know if you have other.
No, I think that I agree with that it's about communication, transparency and communication. Those are critical, and I would argue that those are critical to any MEL work that we do. It's also, I think it's also important for the implementing partners to understand, and Harry said this in one of our outbriefs recently, that MEL platforms like ours in Mali and like the one we have in Somalia and in Haiti are effectively extensions of the mission. We're an institutional partner. We're not an implementing partner. And so I think that also just understanding our positionality relative to implementing partners in USAID also helps with that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that resonates very well with all our experiences. The key issue is really demystifying why we are doing the verifications, the third-party monitoring, having the collaborative approach with the IPs from the beginning. And that has really helped for ELMI, the startup process, where we had very lengthy discussions with the IPs, to be able to get what they would really want to see out of the TPM process. And living to the word of it has really helped to build some form of trust. And I think that has made it very smooth, especially when they also see the value. Like one of the things we do is collecting contextual information during the TPM, data collection activities. And the contextual information has been very useful, both to the USAID team and even to the IPs. So they really see a lot of value in what the TPM is bringing on the table. And that is really what unlocks everything. Planning together, having the feedback loops in place, and remaining transparent throughout the entire process, while at the same time remaining objective. Yeah, over.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists for really comprehensively answering this question. And I see there's a bit going on in the chat as well, where Ashley is providing her perspective as an IP about the importance of great communication. And so we appreciate that. So keep going in the chat, everyone. I'm going to move us on to another question. I'm coming from Ashley about TPM in non-permissive environments. Is TPM done only in non-permissive environments? And is this something that, is there a standard definition from USAID of what that means? So I'm going to pass this over to the panel.
I would say in my experience, I've worked on TPM in a number of different contexts recently, most recently in Haiti and Mali. And we also did it on a platform project I worked on in Pakistan. And so I would say my experience of it is really pretty much exclusively in non-permissive environments. Because ideally, USAID agreement, AORs and CORs are able to go to the field themselves. That is what they are supposed to do. And that's really the ideal situation for them to be able to see for themselves what's going on and to interact with people on the ground. And I have a lot of colleagues and friends who have served in those roles over the years. And, one of the things that they've liked least about serving in non-permissive environments is not being able to go to the field themselves and see what's going on. So I would say my experience is that it's really about environments where USAID cannot travel to the field themselves. And just recently, today, we were talking among the Mali team that there are even places that our Malian team members cannot safely go. They might go to a certain point, like they might go to Gao in northern Mali, but they would be restricted to the city. They couldn't go out into the region to some of the smaller communes and villages. So this is the whole point. We have to rely on people who are in those locations to be able to be our eyes and ears.
And that fits my experience as well, Jen. I've only done it in places like Afghanistan or Somalia, but there was an interesting chat and answer in the webinar chat earlier from Urim, who said that you can also use TPM when perhaps USAID's portfolio is just exceptionally large. And it's difficult to reach all of the different intervention sites. So it's not necessarily the non-permissive environment. I did a quick Google search. I can't find an official USAID or other donor description of that, but I welcome anyone else that can to paste that in the chat. Over to you, Katie, for the next question.
Great. All right. So our next question comes from Steva or Steva. Apologies if I'm butchering your name. So TPMs often focus on verification of activities through a participatory approach and triangulation with project documents. So how can this approach flag concerns of aid diversion, and which approaches can be incorporated into TPMs to identify such instances? So I'm going to post this back in the chat as well. So the question is around aid diversion and how TPM can identify instances of this.
Maybe I can take it first stab on the question. This is a very interesting question. I know for USAID Somalia, we had a recent presentation around aid diversion. And this is something that is very critical. Yeah, so for me, what I see is really, even in terms of how you do your selection of respondents, we need to eliminate any potential bias in terms of the feedback you get. That touches on how you do your sampling of the respondents, looking at also the tools, so ensuring that you have multiple approaches of doing it. So you will talk to beneficiaries, you will talk to the different stakeholders, talk to the government agencies, talk to the government reps, talk to the community elders. So having that balance in terms of the people you talk to, at the end of the day, I think it helps to reduce any bias that might be there, and you are able to get more reliable information through the process. Yeah, so that's one way I'm looking at it in terms of reducing any potential bias in the respondents through robust sampling and a mix of methods in your data collection. Over.
Do you want to say something here? I would just add to that I wouldn't necessarily put aid diversion under the umbrella of TPM. For me, it's more aligned with context monitoring. And we have another sub-partner here in Mali who has been helping us with context monitoring. It's a US-based firm called Premise who has some very interesting methodologies. And I just learned last week that they've developed an approach to monitoring aid diversion by having people, they have what they call contributors across a country who contribute via an app. And so, obviously in a place like Mali, that would be biased to young men who are more likely to have smartphones. But they have them take pictures in market, just generally take photographs of markets and send them to Premise. And that way they can see if there are, for example, USAID donated goods in the market for sale inappropriately, for example.
Great, thank you to our panelists. I think you also touched on another question about what are some, different innovative methods you can use with TPM as well. So we have just a couple of minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in before we wrap things up today. So going back to the chat, Victor's question is, how can TPM ensure AOR's and COR's concerns are well catered for during field-based monitoring?
I think I can take that for a start. Yeah, so this really points to what I said during my initial presentation. Of course, one of the things is to ensure that even as you develop the data collection tools, the activity managers have an opportunity to add what is critical to them, what is important to them. And the other bit I mentioned was in terms of selection of the sites or the activities to be verified. Yeah, so that allows that opportunity for them to ensure that their concerns are catered for in terms of the sampling of sites and activities, and also in terms of the questions. Yes, who kind of respond to this question from Victor? Over.
I'll just add to that I think a first critical step is making sure that you have a very clear understanding of what the TPM request is asking for. So, for example, we will review the TPM requests, and sometimes we'll reformulate things so that so that we can make sure that they're framed as an actual verification. Because sometimes we'll find AORs and CORs will just copy paste text from a report or something that will say, you know, the IP is supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not really framed as a verification request. So we'll reformulate that to say, you know, the MollyMail platform will verify and detail what our understanding is and send the request back to USAID so that they can then make sure that we've understood what they're looking for clearly. So that's a very important critical first step. And then the other step is making sure that they review and understand the toolkit design. Who do we plan to talk to? Where do we plan to go? What kind of information do we plan to get from the different stakeholders? And we've developed a table format for presenting that information to USAID in our Molly toolkits so that it's very clear that they can trace from each verification exactly what we're planning to do to make sure that we're going to be able, that we're going to get the information that they need.
Great, thanks, Jen and Lucas. I'm wondering if Harry has anything to add from the USAID perspective about the best way to make sure that AOR and COR's concerns are catered to during TPM.
No, I think Jennifer says it all, so nothing to add.
Great. All right. Well, we have, all right, we're kind of wrapping up toward the end of our webinar. We had another question come in the chat. I think we may not quite have time to answer, but I do want to read this as it's really important to the next stage of what happens with TPM. Christine is asking, not Christine, but there is a question from Albana about how adaptations are made once the monitoring data comes in. So something to think about. And I think from this point, I will pass on to Chris. And thank you so much to everyone for sharing your questions and for panelists to answer the questions as well.
Yep, a quick response to Albana. Just we have a recommendations tracker where we track all of the TPM recommendations that we make for follow-up, right? Those that have done TPM before will recognize flagging, so different elements of assigning priority to different corrective actions. All of that can help make sure that TPM findings are used, as well as the TPMs field monitors themselves following up on their own recommendations, which we also do via a gigantic recommendation tracker. Thank you all so much for a really active discussion, Q&A, participatory exercise today. You all will be hearing from us. It doesn't end with just this webinar, but we look forward to sending an email to all the participants who have joined us today with the publicly available recording of this webinar, and also the slides themselves. So we really want to share this with you all for your use and your own innovations. We may be also following up with the audience just to let them know. We may also develop a blog based on some of this very active Q&A, and obviously invite your comments on that blog, because I think that that's an important part, right, of the innovations we discussed, the sharing of evidence, and the sharing of our experiences today. So with that, I'll thank our panelists. Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you very much, Lucas, and thank you very much, Jen. And thank you, Katie, for leading the participatory exercise. And we'll sign out. Thank you all very much, and look forward to hearing from us via email soon.